Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in, make yourself comfortable. Maybe you have a little lunch that you're eating while you're participating. We're going to give a few more people an opportunity to join us, and we're going to go ahead and get started. But while you're waiting, if you look on your screen, you should see a trivia question for you. So take a couple of seconds to read the trivia question and type your guess in the chat. Erica will be sharing the answer to that question here in a few minutes, but participate. I don't know that we have any prizes to give you, but hopefully you'll get the correct answer. So a couple of more people coming in. And we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you all that are just joining us, I was just telling the people that were already in this session that we have a trivia question on the screen. And so if you can type your guess in the chat, that would be great. And Erica will give the answer to the question here shortly. All right. Well, we want to thank you for you coming to our second webinar on using maps and data for empowering action to empower action. And we really appreciate you joining us. Our first webinar was on Tuesday, and we are going to have a third webinar next Thursday for people who are in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. And so if you live in that area, or if you have loved ones in that area, or just a general concern about what's going on in that area, then you probably want to check us out next Thursday as well for that particular webinar, and it will be at 1 o'clock also. So I am Jamala Harrison, and I welcome you all this afternoon. I am a member of the Halt the Harm Event Services team, and so I'm really happy to be here with you all. Halt the Harm is a people-powered network that brings together leaders as well as community members, bring you together to help support your efforts and connect you in your efforts to fight the fracking industry and halt their harms. We have a national directory of leaders that we invite you to join so you can see what other leaders are in your area. There is a QR code on the screen that you can scan and sign up for the leader directory and invite your friends. So we encourage you to do that. And you'll get a copy of this presentation with the replay once that's posted. So if you miss any information here today, you can always catch up once you look at the slides from the replay. We also have a site called frackingnextdoor.com. And so that's a great resource if you want to use our help center to find out more information about fracking, particularly in your local area. We also have a helpline that you can call, and that number is listed on the slide. So we invite you to take advantage of that as well. And this is just what the help center looks like. Once you go to search, you'll find articles and other resources related to the impacts of oil and gas and legal protections, and just a variety of things that you could use. And like I said, some of it will be specific to your local area as well. We've got a great network. We're called Halt the Harm Network. So we've got a great network that we invite you to become a member of if you are not already a member of the network. We have our own kind of social media discussion forum that is a lot nicer than some of those other social media platforms that you may use, and it's specific just to halt the harm in our efforts to stop the fracking industry. So we invite you to join that. You'll be able to see what events we have coming up. You'll be able to get access to recordings and replays like the one for this webinar here. You'll be able to converse with other people who are like-minded. So we invite you to take part in that if you're not already a member. And just a few logistical things for today. Feel free to use the chat to engage and ask questions. We will have a brief Q&A that's going to take place at the end of the webinar. If you run into any issues during the actual webinar, you can feel free to send me a direct message in the chat. Again, my name is Jamala, but if for some reason you get kicked off and you need to try to get back on or you have a question, you can always email me at jamala@halttheharm.net as well. And this is the website for the network that I mentioned. So you can feel free to continue discussing things that were brought up in this webinar once you are logged into the network. We are going to record this session and we are going to post the replay either later this week or early next week. So you can feel free to check that out. It will be posted on our website, halttheharm.net, and go under webinars and look in the archives area, and you'll be able to see the webinar replay as well as this particular slideshow. You'll also be able to find it in the network in the recording space as well. So you will get a brief survey that will be sent to you. So we love your feedback. If you have any suggestions for future trainings that you would like to see or you would like to lead, please email Ryan at halttheharm.net. And these are just some other great resources for you as well, and FracTracker's website, which you'll hear more about later. So thank you again for giving me your time and attention. I really appreciate that, and just excited to be able to partner with you on stopping fracking and building a national network to do that. So now I am going to stop sharing because I am going to turn it over to Erica Jackson. And Erica is the manager of community outreach and support for FracTracker Alliance. So Erica, take it away.
Thank you, Jamala. Thank you to everyone who put your guesses in the chat. If you joined us a little late, we had this trivia question at the beginning of matching the map to the description. So I'm going to reveal the answers. There they are. The first one is the congressional district. The second one is the desal plant, land for a desalination plant. The third is an underground coal mine. And the last one is Columbus, Ohio. I don't know if anyone got all of those right, but there wasn't a prize. Just I guess the prize is a feeling of accomplishment. But congratulations if you did get them right. I chose these maps because they all have some kind of power to determine political leaders, allocation of public services, who has access to water or minerals or land. And a lot of times we accept the shapes on a map as fact, but in reality, these borders are decided on oftentimes by a small group of people. And those people don't always have the public's best interest in mind. So our goal at FracTracker Alliance is to make map making and access to data more equitable and more accessible through collaboration with you all, so that people can have a stronger voice when it comes to extractive industries. That's our mission statement. So today I'm really excited. We have FracTracker's full mapping team here, me, Karen, Kyle, Ted, and Matt. And we are going to show you some of our favorite mapping and data projects that we've worked on throughout the years in collaboration with groups across the country, and projects that were used to empower action. Hopefully these examples will get the wheels turning in your head about how these resources could be helpful for your own work. And so then at the end, I'm going to show you a new feature on our website where you can request these tools. And then, as Jamala said, we'll have a little Q&A, and then at the end we'll have time where people can come off mute and discuss things we're working on, and we'll brainstorm ways that our resources could help you, kind of like an impromptu map clinic. And FracTracker's team will stick on for an extra half hour after 2 p.m. if you're on the East Coast, if you want to stick around for that. So to kick us off of this tour, I'm going to pass it over to our Western Program Coordinator, Kyle Ferrar.
Okay, thank you, Erica, and thank you, Jamala. You know, that map of Columbus is really interesting because there's a lot of other cities that look just like that. Los Angeles, for example, Bakersfield. Bakersfield is very similar. Just donuts cut out of it where they didn't want resources going. So pretty interesting. So yeah, I'm Kyle Ferrar. I'm the Western Program Coordinator at FracTracker Alliance. The geographies that I work in are usually California and Colorado. My work usually focuses on environmental justice analyses. I look at exposure assessment models and write reports, and in order to support a lot of the grassroots groups that are working here in California, I support them with maps and data analyses. That's kind of what I'm going to show to you today. I'm going to provide 2 examples of some recent projects that I've done for grassroots groups that they have found particularly impactful for their organizations and for their goals. So the first project is right here on the screen. It is mapping legislative districts. It's a fairly simple project and straightforward, and it focuses on the upper and lower house of California, as well as the federal districts as well. And then we're also doing this work in Colorado also. So pretty simple, just shows the legislative district and pretty much the extraction activity that's occurring within that district. And we include a short report with that, kind of detailing what we find for these districts. And this began like as a single report for one district that that some organizers were working in, and they were going to meet with the legislator. So they asked me to give some background information on really what's happening in the district. And since then, it's expanded, and I've done the majority of districts in California, particularly ones that have extraction in them, but also ones that are targets for legislators to either support legislation. Also, it's really helpful for our legislative champions that are writing bills and trying to get those bills passed. So in the case of Senate District 33 right here, this is a piece of Los Angeles that includes Long Beach and the Wilmington oil fields. And in addition to the short write-up that you see on the left, I've also included links to YouTube videos. These YouTube videos show optical gas imaging footage. This is footage taken with FLIR cameras. And these FLIR cameras are pretty cool. They show hydrocarbon emissions, on screen coming from well sites emissions. They're able to actually visualize it. And, it's a really great tool to show that, there are hydrocarbon emissions, VOCs, PAHs, carcinogens, toxic chemicals coming from these sites. Okay, let's move on to another example. Next slide, please. All right, and so this is Assembly District 37, which is in Ventura County, just north of LA. And here we have a map similar to the other one. This one also shows wells that are located within 3,200 feet of a home or healthcare facility, other sensitive receptor. We're trying to get public health setbacks instituted here in California. So it's a top priority. And in this case, in the report on the left, we also summarized the oil and gas companies that have the most wells in their district, giving a total number of wells, active number, idle well, and idle numbers. And like the previous report, this report here has been utilized by grassroots groups like Communities for Better Environment and Vision to meet directly with legislators. And it shows that these groups have done their research and they're able to convey the risks from community members. And also, you really wouldn't believe how many legislators just have no idea how much oil and gas extraction is occurring, if any, in their district. So, it's enlightening for them. All right, and on to the next project. Next slide, please. All right, so the next report was also a pretty short report, and it was completed at the request of an LA-based grassroots organization called Communities for a Better Environment, CBE. And CBE was approached by Secretary Deb Haaland of the U.S. Department of the Interior. The DOI has funding for plugging and remediating orphan wells in the country, and LA is a target geography considering the high count of idle and orphan wells that are located very, very close to homes. There's a lot of neighborhood drilling, urban drilling in Los Angeles. So we're also going to share the CBE press release about this meeting and about this meeting. It should be in the So CBE is a grassroots organization. They're focused on community organizing rather than data analysis. So they reached out to us at FracTracker to help with preparation for these meetings. So we put together this report that details the risks that are associated with orphan wells, idle wells, and we included maps and an analysis of idle wells that are at risk of becoming orphan wells. When they're orphan, they don't have anyone responsible for the plugging and remediation that's required to plug them up and stop them from being a risk to communities. So this first page is a section of the report on the left, a little background on idle wells. Here we have a picture of a meeting with Secretary Deb Haaland. This is a community meeting that happened in South Central LA. And you can see one of our maps is behind them on the right. And I think we have another picture too, right? Yeah. And there's Secretary Deb Haaland on the left. Yeah, so we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. Perfect. So here is the map that was behind Secretary Deb Haaland. It's from the report, and it is focused on identifying the idle wells that are at risk of becoming orphan wells within the Wilmington field, and specifically within this particular community of South Central LA. To focus on this community, we also highlighted the census demographics of this community. We used census data at the census block group level to show that these communities are specifically communities of color. As you can see, the darker purple indicates population statistics, specifically percentage of non-white community members. Well, we're also going to share a link of the report here in the comments too. And so an orphan well is a well that does not have an owner anymore. So it doesn't have anyone responsible for collecting it. So next slide, if you will. And here are some of the kind of case reports that we wrote. These two sites are still considered to be just idle wells, meaning that they have an operator that is supposed to be responsible for them. Unfortunately, that operator, well, I don't know about unfortunately, but that operator does not have any other producing wells, any other active wells. And usually operators, companies need that income from an active well in order to pay for the plugging and remediation. It usually costs about $500,000, $500,000 to plug a well within the city boundaries of LA. So CBE was able to give Secretary Haaland a tour of these sites. You can see they're very close to homes. This is in South Central Los Angeles. So this report went a long way in identifying the wells that need to be plugged and also educating the DOI on sites that should be targeted for this funding. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here today, and hopefully I can work with some of you in the future. And next up is my amazing colleague from New York, Karen Edelstein.
Thanks so much, Kyle. It's such exciting work that you're doing there. I'd like to give some more examples of work that I've done with FracTracker in collaboration with some of the grassroots groups that I work with to create maps that have been really crucial to fights against the oil and gas industry. In the next couple of minutes, I'll show you some statewide, regional, and also a very localized instance of how that plays out in a community. These maps can show both resistance and civic will for change. They can serve as organizing tools, and they can also help to highlight environmental justice threats similar to ones that Kyle talked about that are just so prevalent across the country in the communities that we often work with and support. Next slide, please. In 2007, high volume hydraulic fracturing was in full swing in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, something that was on the national news. But in New York, where parts of the state sit directly on that formation, we were mostly largely unaware of what was going on just a few miles to our south, until suddenly we weren't. The gas companies were coming into our communities and aggressively leasing private lands for drilling, often to landowners who hadn't realized what they'd gotten themselves into or even consulted attorneys about the implications. So in just 2 years, you can see actually how aggressive that leasing push was. Everything in red is a private parcel that was leased by industry. Next slide. Drilling did not start yet, and as it turned out, it was hampered considerably from ever beginning. But in those first couple of years, the state's environmental agency was scrambling to try to update regulations and figure out this new technology before the drilling actually started. And while that was happening, New York's residents were also educating themselves, and what took place very organically was a push on the part of local municipalities, one by one, to implement bans and moratoria on fracking in their communities. Our map became an organizing tool that both helped towns to see that they were not alone in their fights and also showed the strength of opposition to fracking to our state agency, the Department of Environmental Conservation. Next slide, please. As it turned out, our map was actually a contributing factor in New York State's decision in 2014 to ban fracking. Because of this visualization, the DEC was able to see what kind of a patchwork of local will there was against fracking, and also get just really the big picture approach. Next slide, please. In some communities, unlike in New York State, oil and gas drilling is really deeply entrenched, and community awareness of impacts is generally quite high. Recently, we started working with a group in Tarrant County, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where people were concerned about the sudden uptick in drilling applications in their already heavily drilled county. FracTracker created this interactive map, which I think we can put in the chat in that example, that is going to be showing monthly new permit applications and it will serve as a tool to help the community plan and organize pushback around upcoming permit hearings. Next slide, please. Back in New York State, grassroots activists in New York City are fighting a fracked gas pipeline that would run through the heart of Brooklyn. There are close to 180,000 people who live within a 1,200-foot distance of that route. We worked with community organizers and attorneys there to map the demographics, and if you could just give me the next slide, please, to show parameters like population density and also critical facilities like daycare centers, schools, and medical facilities along the route. And we also have that in the chat if you want to take a look at that map. And next slide, please. We've also, on this project, we used census data so we could show, and in a very distinct visualizing fashion, how the pipeline route impacted areas that were more than 70% non-white, highlighting this clear environmental justice nature to the fight. The visualization of this complex census data allowed us to help communities make data-driven arguments and continue to strengthen their organizing for change. So I'm going to pass the baton to Ted, who will talk about his amazing work in the Great Lakes region. And take it away, Ted.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks everyone for being here. Hi, my name is Ted Auk. I'm a Great Lakes Program Coordinator for FracTracker, and my geography extends from the Ohio River Valley up into Wisconsin, where you can see this photo right here of sand mining to fuel the fracking industry. That's in Barron County, Wisconsin. I took that photo back in, oh gosh, 5 or 6 years ago. I'm going to talk briefly about a couple things. One is the value of long-term water, waste, and landscape data in combating the oil and gas industry's effort to greenwash itself, working with a frontline group in Western Wisconsin to map the current and potentially future state of sand mining up in that area. And then finally, some aerial photography and drone work that I've been doing to answer the question, what's on the other side of the berm? Next slide, please. So in today's, in the current state of the world, it's really interesting to see the oil and gas industry once again reboot the, all of this drill baby drill and energy independence and continuously wrap themselves in the American flag. And I think to myself, when I hear this and I see the State of the Union a couple of days ago, you hear everyone talking about ramping up production. It's always what they focus on. And the oil and gas industry is really good at responding to that kind of demand. And I'm going to draw a little bit on my work in Ohio to kind of refute what I think is a really simplistic way of looking at it. This figure shows gas production in Ohio back to 2013, with the blue line being total gas production in Ohio, which I think, again, is that kind of simplified way of looking at the industry. To my mind, the way to look at the oil and gas sector is to look at them on a per well basis. And now you see on this figure, you see the orange line shows per well production in Ohio, which tells a markedly different story, in my opinion. It tells a story of flatlining to declining production on a per well basis. So to make up for that per well production and that total production that they need to demonstrate to analysts and investors, the industry is becoming more and more inefficient, and they were never very efficient to begin with. Next slide, please, or the next figure, Erica, thanks. Yeah. And that's manifesting in states like Ohio, where I work, in huge exponential increases in fracking waste being disposed of in, for example, our Class 2 injection wells in Ohio and Class 2 injection wells all over the country. So these inefficiencies with respect to waste production are, to my mind, one of the most important things to focus on. And the data tells the story that the industry likes to focus on, again, that total gas production. But to my mind, it's waste is going up and away, and it's not a pretty sight. It's resulting in really horrible bills in places like Columbus and other states to make it easier to dispose of waste, spread it, and commodify it. Next slide, please. Thanks. And then, obviously, the thing that I'm probably most interested in by force, not by choice, is the fact that the water consumption by the oil and gas industry is going up and away as well. And you can see here, this is, again, both these figures are from Ohio. The left side, you see freshwater demand per well going up to the tune of 300 to 500% over the time that we've been looking at the data. And this is coming, again, to make up for that spread in per well and total gas production. It's all the other way that the industry is doing in this is with the advent of what they like to call super laterals, which I would call another thing that I probably can't say on this platform. But these laterals are resulting in these laterals are 2, 3, sometimes 4 and 5 times as long as they were when the oil and gas industry entered Ohio. For example, you can see here 6,000 foot laterals back in 2010. We routinely have 20,000 foot laterals in Ohio at this point. So these inefficiencies are just growing. They've run amok over places like Ohio and other states. Next slide, please. And to my mind, the way to frame this and the way to combat the industry's greenwashing, whether it's green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, or the responsibly sourced gas that they keep kind of, marching out there, is to couple production, which they like to talk about, with something they don't like to talk about, which is the resources they need to get the gas out of the ground. And to my mind, the way to do this is to put those resources in the numerator and the gas in the denominator and talk about the industry from a ratio standpoint. And I think if you look at those ratios and the inefficiencies that keep growing over time and across geographies, you're going to tell a different story, a more holistic story about what it is that's that we're doing to people and to the environment in the name of energy independence. And it's not pretty. But again, I think it's a helpful way to frame this thing that they keep talking about. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pivot dramatically here to a different geography and talk briefly about a project I worked on with some frontline groups up in Western Wisconsin to look at the current and potentially future state of sand mining in the area if these inefficiencies I've already talked about kind of manifest. On the left side, you see a company called Meteor Timber that was proposing a huge expansion a couple years ago, which actually never came to fruition because the price of oil and gas plummeted and they kind of retrenched. But the point here is that there was a group up there that was really concerned about what would come of that proposal. So we mapped out parcels that they owned and that their partners owned in the area. And you can see in the dark blue, that's the potentially future state of sand mining. And the green and the gray is the current state of sand mining in that area. On the right-hand side, you can see another project we worked on where we looked at what Scott Walker liked to talk about what Scott Walker was trumpeting out as the marketable non-metallic mineral deposit program, which would basically say that if you could demonstrate a profitable form of silica beneath your property, that you can legacy it, you can grandfather it into the state's regs so that any community cannot, if they decided to restrict or ban sand mining, you would be legacied into that. And you can see the extent of those parcels that were registered is in the orange there. It would have been a huge build out of sand mining. I'm not convinced that this is a fight that's over yet, but we did map this out. And I think it is helpful for people to be more proactive rather than reacting to the industry up in Western Wisconsin. Next slide, please. So a project that's been near and dear to my heart is basically where I've been getting up in planes and using drones to photograph the oil and gas industry, to include sand mining and some other things. And it really just came as a result of quotes like this from a friend of mine, Rick Coleman, who lives actually to the north of this mine and to the right of this picture, who said this to me when I was in his house one day 4 or 5 years ago. And I thought, boy, that's the perfect way to put it. And you hear that kind of variation on that theme wherever you go. It's this idea that when they build fences or they put up berms, whatever the case may be, you never know what's going on the other side of those. So we've been collecting these images to try to answer that question. Next slide, please. This is a story that's really near and dear to my heart because it's the most recent, I think, it's the most recent story that I think really moves me because it's a sign of a state and the Corps of Engineers and all manner of other players throwing people like Kevin and Marlene Young, who have the property on the right-hand side here. You can see their track, their horse track, throwing these people under the bus in the name of gas power plants in this instance. So Kevin and Marlene have this property. They've had it for decades. They put so much money into this property, and now they live in the shadow of this power plant. But more importantly, the power plant that they built required so much earth moving that now Kevin and Marlene are in a floodplain. Even with 1-inch rain events, they're getting flooded out. So this imagery and the images that we've collected of this property, I think, have fueled some pretty good efforts from journalists like Julie Grant and some others at Allegheny Front. And so that was a really helpful project, but I just think it's a sign of what we're doing, who we're throwing under the bus in the name of some of this stuff. Next slide, please. Final slide. Yeah, and so this is a project I've been working on with Teresa Landrum and Doug Wood. You can see them in the bottom right there during COVID, and the Marathon Oil Refinery right there. The #1 bad actor in Southwest Detroit. Even Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman Tlaib, has talked about how that Marathon Refinery was the operator that caused her father to pass away prematurely. So we've been working with Teresa and Doug to kind of chronicle some of this infrastructure and the proximity of it to neighborhoods. In the same way that we work with Rick Coleman and others, it's basically just getting up over these berms and looking at this stuff in relation to parks and baseball fields and the like. It's been a pretty powerful tool, I think, and again, a direct response to people's concerns. So yeah, so with that, I will quickly pivot to Matt Kelso, my colleague, and he can talk about his work mapping the watershed impacts of oil and gas.
Thank you, Ted. So yeah, in the next few slides, we're going to be looking at mapping projects at the watershed level. So in recent years, FracTracker has taken an in-depth look at the impacts of drilling and related activities on several major watersheds in Pennsylvania's Susquehanna River Basin, including Pine Creek, Loyalsock Creek, and Lycoming Creek. While these constitute a small portion of Pennsylvania's total impacts, we found that the watershed approach is useful in understanding how drilling has dramatically changed the landscape in Pennsylvania, affecting the air quality, water resources, and the people who live there. Interestingly, we found that the industry's boosters are incredibly touchy about these reports, as they have responded to them with a variety of name calling, straw man arguments, and other insincere misdirections. So in this slide, you can see some native wildlife enjoying a day at the park on the left. And on the right, we see volunteers gathering to discuss the data collection process prior to the fieldwork. Next slide, please. So this slide shows a summary of infrastructure in the Lycoming Creek watershed as of late spring 2021. Some of this requires aerial support to document, which Ted mentioned earlier, because of closed private roads, while other portions are hidden in plain sight. Some of the categories that we've documented in these watersheds appear on the slide, although the totals here are just from the Lycoming Creek project, which was our most recent. Participating in a project like this really helps to connect the dots with respect to the total impact that this one industry has on the landscape. So if you live in northeastern Pennsylvania and are interested in participating in a project such as this later this spring, please let me know. So a couple points about the images that we're seeing here. So when we look at pipelines on the bottom left, even a modest 50-foot pipeline right-of-way equates to over 3 acres of clearing per linear mile. And there are millions of miles of pipelines in the US, and it can have a serious impact on forest fragmentation, as well as removing carbon sinks. And as for water consumption, throughout the Susquehanna River Basin, they put up these signs saying how much water each well is allowed to withdraw or to consume. And they're allowed to withdraw between 4 to 6 million gallons of water per day, every day for 4 to 6 years. So between these two signs that we're looking at here, the allotment is 15.8 billion gallons of permitted use. And on the right there, since 2011, the wells in the Lycoming Creek watershed alone have generated more than 9 million barrels or 381 million gallons of liquid waste, and more than 416,000 tons of solid waste. Next slide, please. Now we're going to look at some of the impacts that drilling has on water in these watersheds. On the left, we see a beautiful photo of Pine Creek taken at sunset. One of the questions that we're asking with this type of analysis is, how much drilling can this watershed withstand? Driving around the watershed, the changes to the landscape brought on by drilling are fairly obvious. But the changes to water quality and quantity are not as apparent when driving through. The map on the right includes water withdrawal sites in green and gray, the location of interconnections, which are large water impoundments shown in blue, water-related violations assessed by state regulators shown in yellow, numbering as many as 116 on a single well pad, and municipalities that have received private water supply complaints shown in pink. All of these have a cumulative effect, and in time it is reasonable to suspect that they will have an effect on the species that rely on clean and abundant water to thrive. Next slide, please. Okay, moving on from watershed projects, I also wanted to highlight another example of an analysis that we performed at the local scale. So here we are looking at a second proposed waste disposal well in Plum Borough, which is in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. That well is the Sadat 4A well shown in the middle of the map. We mapped buffers of 500 and 1,000 feet and combined these buffers with parcel boundaries shown here in blue and building footprints, which are a faint purple color. This helps to show the nearby residents who will be most affected by this infrastructure if it's approved. These sorts of maps invite the viewer to imagine what it would be like to live next to a polluting facility such as this, which can feel more abstract the more zoomed out the map happens to be. There are thousands of local issues related to oil and gas, all of which are unique, so the data sets that are used in our maps will reflect those situations. All right, now I'm going to pass it back to Erica Jackson, who's going to talk more about the services that we provide.
Thanks, Matt, and the rest of the FracTracker team for those examples. I hope that everyone watching, got some inspiration. If there was something that you found really impactful, we'd love if you could share that, in the chat so we can take note. And for our next portion of this webinar, we're going to discuss how to request the tools you need from us. We want to make this really easy for you all to do. So we've added a new section to our website. It's a services page where you can see examples of the types of things that we offer and fill out a quick form to ask for them. So this is at fractracker.org/services. If you scroll down that page, you can see kind of the 6 main categories of types of things we offer and click on the one you would like. For example, custom maps. We've already talked a lot about the types of maps we make, but on this page, you can see more examples of those and fill out a quick form to ask for what you would like. And we tried to make this pretty easy and straightforward, so don't worry if you don't know exactly what you're looking for or you don't know, the mapping jargon. We can help walk you through that. And a quick note, we do have hundreds of maps on our website already, including a map for every state where there's oil and gas wells. So be sure to check those out if you haven't already. The next thing we provide is data, which is pretty broad. We share data with researchers and people and groups to try and combat the lack of transparency that the oil and gas and energy industry has. So this could be in a lot of different formats. For example, an Excel sheet or a mapping file, shapefile, or KML if you use Google Earth. Or maybe you just need someone to write out in regular words some kind of statistic or information, make a graph or a chart. We're happy to do that for you. Again, it's on the services page, click data, and there's a quick form to ask for what you're looking for. The third thing we have are multimedia services. Ted and others, but probably mainly Ted, have spent years collecting imagery of energy infrastructure, not just oil and gas, but other types of extractive industries and renewable energy. And we've also collaborated with different groups to put together audio stories, short podcasts, short videos to share the impacts of the industry, and you can request that here. But once again, a lot of this is already on our website, so you can browse through our images and use those for your own campaigns. Just make sure to cite FracTracker. We also offer training and support for how to use our mapping tools. This could be just one-on-one if you're not comfortable using our mapping interfaces. We can walk you through that, or sometimes other mapping tools can be kind of cumbersome. We're happy to help you out with that. Or we can create a custom training for a specific group, like medical professionals or public officials or people in your community. And we can also show ways that you can collect and map your own data through tools like the FracTracker app and other mobile or online tools. You can crowdsource data and photos, and we can use all of that to build really cool maps that are great tools for community engagement as well. We are happy to meet with community organizers and residents working towards just energy solutions, virtual or occasionally also in person. During these kinds of visits, we can share our existing resources, data, and maps, and also discuss new ways that FracTracker could support your campaigns by creating new tools and resources for you. And lastly, we're happy to speak on webinars or in classrooms with community groups and other kinds of events about the risks of oil and gas development, but also about the role of mapping and data transparency in this movement. And of course, we're happy to create new content for these sorts of presentations. So those are kind of the 6 services that we offer. Again, you can go to fractracker.org/services to request these. In the past, you may have, if you worked with us before, you may have sent us an email or called us and to discuss projects. And of course, you can continue to do that. But to streamline the process, you kind of know what you want. You can go straight to our website and request it, and we will move forward with that. A quick note on funding. So a lot of the resources and services we provide, we do that for groups for free, prioritizing groups on the front lines of extractive industries. But if it is a project that is going to require a substantial amount of time, then we'll discuss funding options with you. And so now I'm going to pass it back to Jamila for any questions that you may have on this. And again, the FracTracker team will be sticking around until around 2:30 if you want to stay on and discuss mapping projects and brainstorm with us. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, Erica. I appreciate that. So as Erica mentioned, we're going to have a brief Q&A, and I am going to go ahead and bring our speakers back up. But while I am in the process of doing that, I wanted to invite everyone to put your questions in the chat if you haven't already. I know that we've already had some questions come up, and I've made note of them. If you don't get a chance to get your question answered, that is fine. Just stick around if you can for the discussion session, because that will be an opportunity for everyone to brainstorm any ideas that they have, share any campaigns that they're working on, as well as ask any questions that they weren't able to ask during this actual presentation. So I will get started with the first question, and that was toward Kyle. Have you done offshore oil mapping, was the question.
Oh, great question. Yes, we have pretty extensively. I will link to that. So we've looked at offshore wells within state waters and compared that to offshore wells within federal waters. And, you know, we with ranges of sea mammals and endangered species, as well as overlaying it with different environmental zones, things of that nature. And then we've also looked at in relation to the pipeline spills that have occurred, the one that occurred just in 2021 in the fall, as well as the spill that occurred in Santa Barbara County. And we've looked at a bit of production from these wells, offshore wells, and have also looked at decommissioning costs of these offshore platforms, because it is very expensive to plug and abandon and remediate a well that is offshore.
Thank you so much. All right, our next question was also for you, Kyle. It was during your presentation. Someone said, how can you identify that those are dangerous emissions? I'm assuming that they're referring to things that were color coded or highlighted in your maps.
Yeah, I think they were referring. So I think they were referring to the emissions that we filmed using FLIR cameras. These are optical gas imaging cameras. These cameras are really cool. That is able to see in the infrared spectrum, and different lenses are able to see different cocktails of chemicals depending on the length of hydrocarbons. And so that's our first indication of what you're seeing. Each lens is able to pick up a different collection of these chemicals, of these hydrocarbons. Now, besides that, it is pretty well understood that emissions from oil and gas wells, these fugitive emissions that are coming to the surface, are a cocktail of hydrocarbons. These hydrocarbons include methane, right, which is what we consider to be natural gas, CH4, just one carbon chain, ethane being 2 carbon chains, right, and then upwards from there. It's depending on the geography and the formation that's being drilled, that ratio of methane to ethane to all of these other longer chain hydrocarbons that we're concerned with, BTEX chemicals, which are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes, as well as the multitude of other compounds that are similar. We call them polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and other VOCs we're concerned with. We know that they are all within that gas. The ratio of them will change, but we know that they're all there. There have been many studies done sampling at the well site within these emission streams that have broken these emissions down into these categorical hydrocarbons and showing relative concentrations of them. But it's accepted that they are going to exist no matter where you are, and no matter which formation you are drilling from. So.
Thank you. So Karen, during your presentation, someone asked, I understand the visualization piece, but could you also talk about how FracTracker gets access to the source data? So for example, the drilling permits in Texas, how do you get access to it in quasi real time?
Sure. So the Texas drilling permits are posted as they come up on the Texas Railroad Commission page. Right now, I'm pretty new to working with that data set, and the data are not streaming in real time into the map. I'm downloading them, processing them, and it does take a little bit of manipulation to get them into the map, and doing that on a monthly. Right now, the plan is to do it on a monthly basis.
And then the last question that we have time for is, someone wanted to know if FracTracker has media partners in all of the different regions of the country or even nationally.
Yes, we do, for sure. Yeah, if you are a member of the media, definitely keep us in mind, and share our work with the media. That's really important for getting all of this out there. And like Ted was saying, mentioning, I think Julie Grant, or I forget exactly who you mentioned, Ted, but a lot of times we'll work closely with them to get to capture drone or imagery of some sort.
Great, thank you so much. All right, well, the formal part of our webinar has come to an end. I want to thank all of our presenters very much for the information that you shared. It's really insightful. You guys are doing a lot of great work at FracTracker, and so we appreciate everything that you're doing. To everyone who was able to attend, we really thank you for coming and just being able to get the knowledge that you need to understand how FracTracker can help you with your campaigns. If you did not get a chance to ask your question, like I said, don't fret, because we will have an open discussion for about 30 minutes or so, where you can, like I said, share what you're working on, brainstorm any ideas you have on how to integrate data and maps into your campaigns, as well as ask whatever questions did not get asked during the actual webinar portion. I will be compiling some notes and links along with the replay over the next few days, so definitely be on the lookout for that on Halt to Harm's website or in the network, like I mentioned earlier. Just as an FYI, the discussion session that's coming up will not be recorded. So if you don't want to miss that, I suggest you stick around because you will not be able to see that when you watch the replay. But we really appreciate you being here, and we hope you all have a good afternoon. And thank you for coming.